The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. Chapter 14. The Winged Monkeys. You will recall that there was no road, not even a narrow path, between the castle of the Wicked Witch and the Emerald City. When the four travelers set out to find the witch, she saw them coming and sent the winged monkeys to bring them to her. Now it was far more difficult for them to make their way back through the vast fields of buttercups and yellow daisies. It had been much easier when they were carried there. They knew they must travel straight east, toward the rising sun, and at first they set out in the correct direction. But by noon, when the sun stood directly overhead, they could no longer tell east from west, and that was how they became lost in the vast fields. Even so, they continued walking until night, when the moon appeared and shone brightly over them. Then they lay down among the fragrant yellow blossoms and slept deeply until morning, all except the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman. The next morning, the sun was hidden behind clouds, but they set out again as if they were certain of their way. "If we just keep walking," said Dorothy, "I'm sure we'll reach somewhere eventually." Yet day after day passed, and still the scarlet fields stretched endlessly before them. The Scarecrow began to mutter in dissatisfaction. "We must have lost our way," said the Scarecrow. "And if we don't find it soon and reach the Emerald City, I'll never get my brains." "Nor I my heart," said the Tin Woodman. "It seems to me I can hardly wait to see Oz, and you must admit this journey feels endless." "You see," said the Cowardly Lion with a slight whimper, "I don't have the courage to keep on walking forever without ever arriving anywhere." Then Dorothy's spirits sank. She sat down on the grass and looked at her companions, and they sat down too, gazing at her in silence. "What if we called the field mice?" she suggested. "They might be able to show us the way to the Emerald City." "Of course," exclaimed the Scarecrow. "Why didn't we think of that sooner?"
Aha!
Dorothy blew the small whistle she had worn around her neck ever since the Queen of the Mice had given it to her. Within a few minutes, they heard the quick patter of tiny feet, and many little gray mice came running up to her. The Queen herself was among them and said in her squeaky voice, "What may I do for my friends?" "We've lost our way," said Dorothy. "Can you tell us where the Emerald City is?" "Certainly," replied the Queen. "But it's quite a distance away. You've actually been facing the wrong direction this whole time." Then, noticing Dorothy's golden cap, she added, "Why not use its magic charm and summon the winged monkeys? They can carry you to the City of Oz in less than an hour." "I didn't know the cap had a charm," said Dorothy in surprise. "What is it?" "The charm is written inside the golden cap," replied the Queen of the Mice. "But if you mean to call the winged monkeys, we must leave quickly. They are full of mischief and enjoy making trouble for us." "Will they hurt me?" asked Dorothy anxiously. "Oh no, they must obey the one who wears the cap." "Goodbye," said the Queen, as she scurried out of sight with all the mice hurrying after her.
Goodbye.
Dorothy peeked inside the golden cap and noticed some words written along the lining. She guessed they must be the magic charm, so she read the instructions carefully and placed the cap on her head. "Epi pepi kaki," she said, balancing on her left foot. "What are you saying?" asked the Scarecrow, puzzled by her actions. "Hillo, hullo, hello," Dorothy continued, now standing on her right foot. "Hello," the Tin Woodman replied in his usual calm voice. "Zizzy, zuz, zee, zick," said Dorothy, now standing firmly on both feet. The spell was complete, and at once they heard loud chattering and the beating of wings. The band of winged monkeys flew toward them. The king of the monkeys bowed low before Dorothy and said, "What is your command?" "We wish to go to the Emerald City," said the girl. "But we've lost our way." "We will carry you," said the king. No sooner had he spoken than two monkeys caught Dorothy in their arms and soared away with her. Others lifted the Scarecrow, the Tin Woodman, and the lion. One small monkey grabbed Toto and flew after them, even though the little dog tried his best to bite him. The Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman were frightened at first, remembering how cruelly the winged monkeys had treated them before. But when they realized no harm was meant, they relaxed. They enjoyed the flight and admired the lovely gardens and forests far below. "Why do you have to obey the magic of the golden cap?" asked Dorothy. "That's a rather long story," replied the king with a cheerful laugh. "But since our journey will take some time, I'll tell it to you along the way, if you wish." "I'd be very glad to hear it," she said. Once upon a time, the leader began. "We were a free and happy people living in the great forest. We flew from tree to tree, feasted on nuts and fruit, and did as we wished, with no master to command us. Perhaps we were a bit too playful then. Sometimes we swooped down to tug the tails of land animals, chase the birds, or toss nuts at travelers in the forest. Still, we were carefree and full of joy, enjoying every moment of the day. That was many years ago, long before Oz descended from the clouds to rule this land." Long ago, in the northern part of the land, there lived a beautiful princess who was also a powerful sorceress. She used her magic only to help others and never harmed anyone who was kind. Her name was Guylet, and she lived in a splendid palace made from large ruby stones. Everyone admired and loved her, but she felt lonely because she could not find someone to love in return. The men around her were too foolish and plain for someone as wise and beautiful as she was. At last, she met a boy who was handsome, brave, and wiser than most at his age. Gaylet decided that when he became a man, she would make him her husband. She brought him to her ruby palace and used her magic to make him as strong, noble, and good as any woman could wish for. When he reached manhood, he was called Quilala, and people said he was the finest and wisest man in the whole land. His handsome looks and kind nature made Gaylet love him deeply, and she hurried to prepare for their wedding. My grandfather was the king of the winged monkeys that lived in the forest near Gaylet's palace. He enjoyed a good joke even more than a fine dinner. One day, not long before the wedding, he was flying with his troop when he spotted Quilala walking beside the river. Quilala was dressed in a splendid outfit of pink silk and purple velvet, and my grandfather decided to have some fun. At his command, the monkeys swooped down, caught Quilala, carried him high above the river, and then dropped him straight into the water. "Swim out, my fine fellow," my grandfather called. "See if the water has spoiled your clothes." Quelaw was too sensible to be upset. He wasn't proud or spoiled by his good fortune. Laughing, he came up to the surface and swam to the bank. But when Gaylette hurried out to meet him, she saw that his pink silks and purple velvet were completely ruined by the water. The princess was furious, and of course, she knew who was responsible. She ordered all the winged monkeys to be brought before her. At first, she declared that their wings should be bound and that they should be thrown into the river, just as they had done to Quelala. But my grandfather begged for mercy, knowing the monkeys would drown without their wings. Quelala also spoke kindly on their behalf. In the end, Gaylette forgave them on one condition. From then on, the winged monkeys must obey the owner of the golden cap 3 times whenever commanded. The golden cap was made as a wedding present for Quelala, and it was said to have cost the princess half her kingdom. Naturally, my grandfather and the other monkeys agreed to the condition at once. And that is why we must serve the owner of the golden cap 3 times, whoever he may be. "And what became of them?" asked Dorothy, deeply interested in the tale. "Since Quelala was the first owner of the golden cap," replied the monkey, "he was also the first to use its power. His bride could not stand the sight of us, so after their marriage, he called us all to him in the forest. He commanded us to stay where she would never again see a winged monkey. We were glad to obey, for we all feared her greatly. That was our only task until the golden cap came into the hands of the Wicked Witch of the West. She forced us to help her conquer the Winkies and later to drive Oz himself out of the land of the West. But now the golden cap is yours, and you have the right to command us 3 times with it." When the Monkey King finished his story, Dorothy looked down and saw the shining green walls of the Emerald City coming into view. She marveled at how swiftly the monkeys flew, but she was relieved that their journey had ended. The strange creatures gently set the travelers down before the city gate. The king bowed to Dorothy and then soared away, followed by the rest of his band. "That was a great ride," said the little girl. "Yes, and a quick way out of our troubles," replied the lion. "How fortunate that you brought the magic cap with you."
Let's get inside now.